Beneath the surface of excessive pride and dominance lies a profound emptiness, a void they are desperate to fill. What they desire most is to be in charge, not merely of situations, but of people, especially those who care about them. And why is this? Because a self-centered person's sense of self-worth is not founded on any inner stability. It originates from external sources. They require a steady flow of approval, praise, or even disagreements to maintain the fragile facade of their superiority. Without this, their artificial front collapses. This is exactly why pulling away, your refusal to participate in their scheme, hurts them so deeply. When you emotionally distance yourself from a self-centered person, you are performing an action they cannot grasp or manage. You are regaining command. This does not mean shouting, fighting, or making large displays of feeling. No, that still provides them what they want. As they flourish on the vitality you supply them, whether it is favorable or unfavorable. What makes a self-centered person most uneasy is when you do not care, when you no longer respond, when their words, their actions, their presence no longer move you. It strikes at the heart of their greatest apprehension, the fear that they are fundamentally unimportant. Consider how a self-centered person's world operates. Every interaction resembles a transaction. You are not viewed as a person with thoughts, feelings, and genuine value. You are simply an object, a means to acquire what they want. If you compliment them, they feel good. If you argue with them, they feel dominant. Even if you despise them, at least you are still thinking about them. But not caring is entirely different. It signifies they no longer possess any influence over you. And for a self-centered person who exists by controlling the emotional climate around them, that is a colossal defeat. Distancing yourself is so potent because it exposes a reality the self-centered person cannot accept, that you are autonomous. You exist outside of their influence. When you stop engaging with them, you compel them to confront the fact that their tricks no longer govern your emotional existence. This is terrifying for them because it ruins the narrative they tell themselves, that they are superior, that they matter more than anyone else. If you can walk away without being emotionally harmed, it suggests they were never as strong as they believed. There is also a deeper intellectual component at play here. To emotionally distance yourself is to reclaim your own value. When you remain entangled with a self-centered person, when you continue reacting, you are in a sense permitting them to determine your inner life. But by refusing to engage with them, you are asserting a fundamental reality. Your worth is not determined by their approval or disapproval. You are not a toy in their mental performance. You are an independent individual capable of deciding your own emotional condition. But this distancing is not passive. It is an act of significant mental fortitude. It necessitates confronting your own desire for acceptance, your own need to be understood. Because here is the truth. When you distance yourself from a self-centered person, you will never receive a definitive apology from them. They will never acknowledge their error. They will never offer you the apology you merit. And that is part of the challenge. Realizing that your recovery cannot rely on their admission of fault, you must take that back for yourself. There is something oddly contradictory about this procedure. The more effort you put into trying to make a self-centered person understand the anguish they have inflicted, the more influence you give them. But the moment you stop trying, when you distance yourself and progress, they lose their hold entirely. This is why walking away is the biggest turnaround. It completely alters the balance of power. You no longer seek their acceptance, and as a result, they are left with nothing to consume. You see, a self-centered person's greatest fear is not being hated, it is being irrelevant. Hatred still means you care. Not caring means you do not. And when you reach that state of emotional non-caring, when their words and actions no longer provoke a response. You leave them with nothing. This emptiness is deeply distressing for a self-centered person because it forces them to sit with the one thing they have been evading all along, themselves. This is why distancing yourself is such a potent act of liberation. It is not merely about escaping their tricks. It is about retaking your inner domain. You are no longer trapped in their mental conflict. You are free to define yourself by your own principles, and that freedom, that emotional independence, is something a self-centered person will never comprehend, let alone possess. And here is the final, perhaps most satisfying reality. When you distance yourself, you compel the self-centered person to face their own emptiness. Without your emotional vitality to sustain them, they are left with the hollow sensation they have tried so hard to avoid. And while they may never admit it, while they may continue their deceptive performance to the outside world, deep down they know they lost the instant you stopped caring. In the end, the most powerful move you can make is not to fight back, not to explain, not to seek their understanding, but to walk away with your dignity intact. Let them sit in the quiet you leave behind, because that quiet speaks louder than any words ever could. Understanding the self-centered person's reliance on external approval reveals something very crucial. Without your emotional participation, their carefully constructed false image begins to crumble. The self-centered person cannot maintain themselves. Their perception of who they are is not based on anything substantial or real internally. Instead, it is sustained by the responses they receive from those around them. This is why your withdrawal, your decision to leave, is such a major threat to their mental stability. It is not just that you are departing. It is that your absence takes away the energy they require to maintain their fragile belief of being superior to others. At the core of this situation is the concept of narcissistic supply. This term refers to the notice, praise, and emotional reactions that the self-centered person needs to uphold their exaggerated self-image. It is not optional for them, it is essential. Without a steady stream of acceptance, their false importance starts to unravel, leaving them exposed to the very feelings they work so hard to hide: shame, emptiness, and feeling inadequate. When you engage with them, whether through affection, conflict, or even anger, you are essentially feeding that need. But when you walk away, you sever their supply, and that absence destabilizes them in a way nothing else can. What makes this even more damaging for a self-centered person is the nature of the loss itself. You are not simply ending a relationship, you are taking away their ability to define themselves through you. For the self-centered person, relationships are not about mutual connection or genuine care. They are about influence. When you were in their world, they had the influence to shape how you felt about yourself, about them, about the world. By walking away, you not only reclaim that influence for yourself, but you also eliminate the false notion that they can compel others to do what they want forever. And here is the part that pains them the most. The self-centered person needs you more than you ever needed them. They will never confess this. Doing so would contradict their meticulously crafted image of superiority. But it is the truth. While you may experience distress after the relationship, you remain fundamentally whole. You possess an inner life, a source of significance and identity that exists without anyone else's approval. The self-centered person, conversely, is trapped. They cannot continue without someone else to demonstrate their importance. And when you walk away, you force them to face that inner emptiness without anything to distract them. Consider the mental repercussions of this loss. For the self-centered person, being ignored feels like destruction. It is not just a blow to their ego, it is a crisis of their entire existence. Their sense of being relies entirely on external approval. Without it, they are left alone with their most terrifying realization that beneath the mask there is nothing real. This is why your quietness wounds them in ways words never could. It forces them to confront what they have evaded their entire lives, the reality of their own emptiness. It is also why the self-centered person will often react with desperation when they sense you pulling away. They may attempt to regain command through tricks, guilt, or charm. This is not a sign of genuine care or remorse. It is a survival tactic. They are not mourning the loss of you as an individual. They are mourning the loss of their capacity to obtain what they need from you. And the more firmly you refuse to engage with them, the more frantic their attempts will become. This is the moment where your power is fully realized. Because by refusing to return, you deny them the one thing they cannot live without: influence over your emotional world. And yet, the most critical aspect of walking away is not just what it does to the self-centered person. It is what it does for you. It signifies a complete retaking of your independence. For as long as you were involved with them, your emotional reality was shaped by their sudden changes. You doubted yourself. You questioned your value. You may have even believed at times that you needed them to be complete. But by walking away, you shatter that false notion. You state in the clearest possible way that your value is not dependent on anyone else's opinion. There is an astonishing freedom in realizing that you no longer owe your vitality to someone who only tried to make you feel less worthy. And this freedom is something the self-centered person will never experience. They remain trapped in a cycle of needing others to feel real, while you are learning what it means to be whole on your own terms. By leaving, you do not just get your life back. You confirm your worth, your value, and your right to exist without being tricked. And here is the strange turn of events. The most damaging consequence for the self-centered person is that after everything they did to rule you, they ultimately lose you, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. When you walk away with your self-regard intact, you deny them the satisfaction of having left any lasting harm. You become living proof that their influence was always a false idea, and nothing is more intolerable for a self-centered person than knowing that you have progressed, succeeding in a life where their influence no longer matters. In the end, the most powerful act of opposition is not revenge. It is not fighting. It is the quiet, firm decision to walk away and never look back. Because the moment you do, the self-centered person loses the only thing they ever truly had, the ability to control how you see yourself. And once that, influence is gone. They are left with nothing but their own emptiness. And that, perhaps, is the most fitting outcome of all. One of the most powerful ways to make a self-centered person feel the anguish they inflicted is to completely and unapologetically reclaim your identity. This is not a superficial act. It is not about appearances or empty gestures. It is a deep mental process of restoring the parts of yourself that were weakened under their influence. Because here is the truth. A self-centered person's influence relies on your self-doubt. Their capacity to trick you is directly linked to how much you question your own value, your understanding of things, and your right to exist independently. When you begin to reclaim those things, you shatter the very foundation of their influence. Think for a moment about what the self-centered person truly does in a relationship. They slowly damage your confidence through subtle, sometimes open forms of mental conflict. They question your reality, diminish the importance of your achievements, and constantly erode your sense of self. This is not accidental. It is a calculated tactic. Because the more unsure you become, the easier you are to trick. When you lose touch with your own instincts and your inner guidance, you become dependent on their version of reality. And nothing makes a self-centered person happier than having someone who looks to them for approval. This is why taking back your identity is such a powerful act of mental defiance. It is the act of declaring, I decide who I am, not you. And that is the one thing a self-centered person cannot tolerate. They need you to remain unsure because your lack of confidence is their benefit. Without it, they lose the capacity to shape your emotional reality. But here is the intriguing part. When you start to rebuild yourself, the self-centered person senses it. Even if they are no longer physically in your life, they can feel when their influence begins to lessen. And that terrifies them because, in many ways, their entire self-image relies on maintaining a mental hold over others. When you reclaim your identity, you are not just freeing yourself, you are revealing the fundamental weakness beneath their image of being superior to others. And what does this process involve? It starts with the choice to trust yourself again. It means understanding that the voice of self-doubt was never truly yours to begin with. It was planted there by someone who needed you to feel small. And as you begin to reject that voice, something amazing occurs. Your clarity returns. You start to see through the lies you were told, not just about the self-centered person, but about yourself. You realize that you are not weak, you are not broken. You were tricked into believing those things because your strength was a threat to someone who could not face their own flaws. Reclaiming your identity also requires an honest look at the ways you neglected your own needs to maintain harmony, because that is the price of being in a relationship with a self-centered person. You learn to silence your own needs to avoid conflict. You make yourself smaller, hoping that if you are small enough, quiet enough, accepting enough, you will finally be loved in the way you deserve. But that love never arrives because it was never about love. It was about power. And once you see that clearly, you begin to understand that the way forward is not to seek their approval, but to approve of yourself. And here is the benefit of this process. The more you take back your identity, the less the self-centered person matters. They become irrelevant to your emotional life. Their opinion, their judgment, their tricks, none of it holds influence anymore. And for a self-centered person, there is no greater pain than realizing they no longer occupy the center of your world. That is their deepest fear, to be forgotten, to be made meaningless. And by reclaiming yourself, you make that fear a reality. What makes this process so damaging for the self-centered person is that it cannot be reversed. Once you see through the false notion, you cannot unsee it. Once you experience the freedom of self-trust, you will never again hand your influence over to someone else. And the self-centered person knows this. They know that once you reclaim your identity, you become immune to the very methods they once used to control you. And that loss of power, it hurts deeper than anything else ever could. But there is something else, something even more important. When you reclaim your identity, you do not just heal yourself. You become a living reminder of the self-centered person's failure. You prove by simply existing that their influence was never complete, that no matter how much they tried to break you, they did not succeed, and that reality, it bothers them. Because if they cannot rule you, it means their entire story about themselves is a lie. And make no mistake, this is not an easy process. It takes bravery to face the ways you were made to feel less worthy. It takes strength to rebuild yourself from the foundation up. But the reward is freedom, real, lasting freedom. And that is something the self-centered person will never experience. They remain trapped in a prison they made for themselves, while you walk away with your dignity whole. So if you want to make a self-centered person feel the anguish they put you through, take back yourself. Refuse to be defined by their false ideas. Trust your instincts again. Speak your truth without apology. And most importantly, live a life that shows the completeness of who you truly are. Because nothing causes more pain to a self-centered person than knowing that you escaped their grip and that without you, they are left alone with the emptiness they worked so hard to deny. One of the most vital ways to make a self-centered person feel the anguish they caused you is by achieving emotional distance, by by reaching the point where they no longer affect your inner world. Now, that might sound simple in theory, but anyone who has been involved with a self-centered person knows how deeply they become a part of your mind. Their manipulation is not just on the surface, it cuts to the core. They work hard to tangle your feelings, your thoughts, and even your perception of reality with their approval or disapproval. But when you distance yourself, when you sever the emotional connection, they lose the very thing that gives them influence over you. To understand why this is so potent, we first need to understand what a self-centered person truly craves. It is not affection in any true sense. It is not even respect. What they desperately need, what they cannot live without, is notice, both favorable and unfavorable. Psychologists refer to this as narcissistic supply. It is the vitality they take from others to sustain their weak self-image. Without it, they feel empty, weak, like a hollow shell with nothing real inside. This is why a self-centered person presses your emotional points with such accuracy. They provoke responses, whether through praise or cruelty, because your emotional response confirms their importance. It assures them that they matter, that they still have influence over your world. When you emotionally distance yourself, you completely break this pattern. And this is not the same thing as pretending you do not care. People often mistakenly believe that faked indifference still keeps you mentally tied to the self-centered person because you are reacting to them in some way. True distance goes deeper. It means they no longer have the ability to stir your emotions. Their words and actions lose their influence to cause anger, guilt, or desire for them. And that, more than anything, destroys the hold they once had over you. Here is the contradiction. The more fiercely a self-centered person attempts to rule you, the more dependent they become on your emotional involvement. When you distance yourself, it creates a void, an emptiness they cannot bear. Suddenly, the person they once relied on for acceptance no longer feeds them, and that absence, it is intolerable. Self-centered people do not handle rejection in any form well, but emotional distance is especially painful because it shows that their tricks have failed. And failure to a self-centered person is more than a setback. It is a threat to the very identity they have constructed. But emotional distance is not just an act of opposition, it is an act of liberation. Because as long as you remain emotionally tangled with a self-centered person, whether through anger, desire for them, or even the wish for revenge, you remain their captive. Your mind stays focused on their schemes. Your heart is weighed down by the wounds they inflicted. Distance frees you from those mental chains. It allows you to retake your mental and emotional space they once occupied without permission. Let us be clear, reaching this level of distance is not easy. It requires significant effort and a willingness to confront uneasy realities. You must be honest about how deeply you were affected, how much of yourself you lost in the process, and more importantly, you have to be willing to let go, not just of the self-centered person, but of the hope that they will ever become the person you wanted them to be. Because that hope, more than anything else, is what keeps people stuck. The belief that if you just try harder, if you just say the right thing, you will finally be seen, finally be loved. But with a self-centered person, that day never comes. Letting go of that false idea is the first step toward true distance. And here is the wonderful part. When you achieve that distance, the self-centered person senses it right away. They may not voice it, but they feel it profoundly. Their usual methods no longer work. The guilt trips, the silent treatment, the intense displays of affection, all the tricks that once pulled you back into their world fall flat. And that realization is devastating for them because it reveals a reality they cannot accept, that they are not as powerful or as necessary as they desperately want to believe. Moreover, emotional distance changes the balance of power completely. When you are no longer emotionally involved, you become impossible to predict. The self-centered person cannot guess your responses because you are no longer reacting to them. And for someone who thrives on influence, unpredictability is intolerable. It forces them to face a reality they have spent their entire lives evading, that they are not the center of the universe, not even the center of yours. But the most crucial outcome of emotional distance is that it breaks the cycle. Self-centered abuse is a recurring pattern by nature: intense closeness, then lowering your value, then discarding you, then starting over. As long as you remain emotionally mixed up with them, you remain open to being dragged back into that cycle. Distance ends the loop. It indicates that you are no longer a part of their mental performance. And without an audience, the self-centered person's act loses its significance. Ultimately, the greatest anguish you can inflict upon a self-centered person is to make them irrelevant. And emotional distance is the surest route to that result. It is not about punishing them. About taking back yourself. It is about recognizing that their behavior says nothing about your value and everything about their emptiness. And when you reach that place, when their words and actions no longer hold emotional weight, you become truly free. And in that freedom lies the final blow. Because nothing hurts a self-centered person more than knowing they no longer have a hold over you, that the person they worked so hard to break is now beyond their reach. And once you have reached that point, there is no going back. They lose and you win, not through fighting back, but through your freedom. A vital truth to understand when dealing with a self-centered person is that their sense of being superior to others is a fragile false idea, a mask carefully constructed to conceal deep feelings of inadequacy. When you walk away and refuse to engage with them, that mask starts to crack. The influence they once had over you was based on their ability to control what you believed, to make you doubt yourself, to distort your reality. By stepping away, you compel them to face the reality they have spent their lives evading, that they are not unbeatable, and their carefully made image is nothing more than a hollow shell. To understand why this is so damaging for a self-centered person, you need to grasp the mental foundation of their personality. At the core of self-centeredness lies a deep feeling of not being enough, an empty space that cannot be filled. Despite the proud and exaggerated importance they display, the self-centered person is plagued by self-doubt and a constant fear of being exposed as weak or unworthy. This fear is so intolerable that they construct a false self, an image intended to appear superior, flawless, and beyond criticism. Every action they take is for the purpose of sustaining this false idea. But it is not a strong structure. It needs constant external approval to stay intact. When you walk away, when you eliminate yourself as a source of approval, you strike this fragile structure directly. Without someone to reflect their superiority back to them, they are left with the one thing they cannot tolerate themselves. And make no mistake, being left alone with their true self is, for a self-centered person, a form of mental anguish. They rely on external support to maintain the belief that they are special, superior, and worthy of praise. Without it, the false idea starts to fall apart, and the emptiness beneath it becomes impossible to disregard. This is why a self-centered person fights so hard to maintain influence. They know, perhaps not fully consciously, but instinctively, that their identity is weak. Your presence, your reactions, your emotional involvement all act as proof that their mask is effective, that they are as powerful and important as they want to believe. But when you walk away, you take that proof away from them, and without it, they are left struggling, exposed to the very insecurity they have spent their entire lives trying to escape. What is particularly interesting and sad is how easily this false idea can be broken. A genuinely confident and secure person does not need to rule or trick others to feel complete. They can handle being rejected. They can accept criticism, but for the self-centered person, any form of rejection, including your decision to walk away, feels like a threat to their existence. It is not just that they lose influence over you, they lose control over the story they tell themselves about who they are. And when that story collapses, what remains is the raw, exposed reality they cannot face, that beneath the grand exterior lies deep inadequacy. And yet, despite the anguish this causes them, the self-centered person cannot admit to themselves that they're suffering. G is caused by their own actions. Instead, they blame others. They convince themselves that you were the problem, that your refusal to cooperate with their false idea is a betrayal rather than an act of self-protection. This is why walking away hurts so deeply. It takes away their ability to maintain their false idea without giving them a person to blame that they can fully control. They are left with the truth they fear most, that they are not as powerful or as superior as they desperately need to believe. And it is important to understand that this crumbling does not happen instantly. It is a slow, difficult procedure. At first, the self-centered person may react with intense rage, trying to punish you for ruining their story. If that fails, they may try desperate methods to get you back, not out of affection or genuine remorse, but because they need you to restore their sense of self. But if you stand firm, if you refuse to engage with them, the mask keeps slipping. And with each passing day, the weight of their insecurity grows heavier. The cracks in their false front deepen, and the false idea they have spent a lifetime constructing becomes harder to maintain. What makes this form of consequence so profound is that it cannot be reversed by the self-centered person alone. They cannot simply rebuild the false idea on their own terms. They need others to participate in the fantasy, to reflect back the image they want to see. When you refuse to play that role, you leave them helpless, unable to strengthen the identity they cling to so desperately. And that, more than any act of revenge, is what truly makes them suffer. Here's the crucial point. You do not walk away to hurt the self-centered person. You walk away to heal yourself. The anguish they experience, as a result, is not something you cause. It is the consequence of their own distorted way of being. By refusing to participate in their false idea, you free yourself from the mental cage they built around you. And in doing so, you expose the fundamental reality they have spent their lives evading, that their influence was always a false idea, entirely dependent on your willingness to play along. In the end, the most profound form of justice is not in seeking revenge, but in taking back your independence. When you walk away, you deliver the most damaging blow, not by fighting, but by refusing to be controlled. And in that refusal, you remind the self-centered person of a truth they cannot escape, that without your involvement, their influence is nothing more than an empty, false idea. When you walk away from a self-centered person and begin rebuilding your life, something extraordinary occurs. You reclaim the very thing they worked so hard to take from you, your identity. And that, more than anything else, is what leaves them powerless. You see, a self-centered person's influence relies on their ability to dictate who you are. They slowly damage your confidence, distort your perception of things, and impose their version of reality onto you. Over time, you may begin to question yourself, your value, your beliefs, even your grip on reality. But the moment you step away and begin the work of discovering who you are, outside their influence, their grip on you weakens and eventually disappears completely. This restoration of identity is not simply an act of opposition, it is an act of deep self-regard, and it is vital to understand why this is so damaging for the self-centered person. Their entire way of operating depends on control. The identities of those around them. In their world, other people are not viewed as independent beings with their own values and desires. They are seen as extensions of the self-centered person, tools to be utilized, mirrors to reflect back the image they want to see. When you walk away and begin to define yourself on your own terms, you destroy that false idea. You stop being an object for their manipulation and retake your position as an independent, self-directed individual. And here lies the deepest contradiction. For all their boasting and exaggerated self-importance, self-centered people lack a strong sense of self.